In my videos, I usually try and stay clear of being overly forceful with my opinions. I kind of view myself as like a, almost like a third-party bedroom analyst, and I don't want to start telling people how to think about fights, how to think about fighters, what they should think on a certain boxing issue, etc. But I do want to be a bit stronger in this video. Now, Eddie Hearn hasn't flat out come out and said that Kell Brook Diego Chaves is going to be a pay-per-view without the Tyson Fury-Klitschko fight. But yesterday, in the video I posted announcing that Fury-Klitschko was off, I speculated that, in my opinion, I thought it was still quite likely that Eddie Hearn would try and run this as a pay-per-view event. And the early indications are that, unfortunately, I may well be right. Now, I haven't seen much of Eddie Hearn discussing this. There hasn't been an official announcement, as I understand it. If I'm wrong on that, please do comment, please let me know. But as I understand it, there hasn't been an official comment from Eddie Hearn. What there has been is interviews on Boxing News Online, interviews with IFL TV, where he's alluded to the fact that the show must go on and we can't change things up just because one fight's off, and that we can't, you know, back out of Kell Brook versus Diego Chaves when the contracts are signed and the deal is done. Now, at this point, having listened to Eddie Hearn, I'm about 80-90% sure that this card is still pay-per-view. One thing that has strengthened that opinion, and I might be wrong, Eddie Hearn may now have officially announced it is pay-per-view, so if that is the case, then fine. But one thing that strengthened that opinion is that Eubank Jr. will be added to the card in some sort of 8 or 10 rounder. So he's a sellable co-main event. He's a guy who generates immense interest. He is a guy who people probably will pay to see. So you've got Kell Brook headlining. You've got Eubank Jr. on the undercard. You've got some other names, Gavin McDonald, Ricky Burns, etc. on the card. So I think that Eddie Hearn is going to look to add one other fight, maybe add one other named fighter. And that's where we're going to go with this card, and it's going to be on pay-per-view. Now, the rest of what I'm going to say on this video is on the basis that I'm right and that this does go to pay-per-view. Please disregard everything I say from here on in if for any reason this bill doesn't go to pay-per-view. I also want to withhold a slight disclaimer on the fact, I don't know, if Eddie Hearn pulls out the return of David Haye fighting a decent opponent, or something of that nature, and adds it to the card, then maybe it does become pay-per-view. Maybe Carl Froch fancies a comeback, something ridiculous like that. He could add something ridiculous, or the fight could not be pay-per-view. So this video is now going to be done on the basis that the current bill, as it currently stands, with Brook Chaves, Eubank Jr., McDonald, Ricky Burns, is pay-per-view. Now, I have actually not been against pay-per-view. Most of my colleagues and YouTube channels that I watch are typically more against pay-per-view and more against that model than I am. I actually think there's a place for pay-per-view. I think it helps to make fights that otherwise couldn't be made. And I do think there are occasions worth paying for. I've actually been a bit vocal via YouTube on my support for bills like the Cleverly Bellew bill, or bills like the even the Brook Frankie Gavin bill, which had the strong undercard, and I've actually supported those on my channel, and so I think people are being a bit harsh on those bills. So this is coming from someone who's not just anti-Eddie Hearn, anti-Sky, anti-pay-per-view for the sake of it. But let me say, if this card is pay-per-view, in my opinion, it's a disgrace. Let me go further than that. I won't be paying for this pay-per-view. And if you're watching this video, I would suggest that you should avoid paying for it. And I'll tell you why. If you pay for this pay-per-view, if I pay for this pay-per-view, it's creating a precedent. It's saying that you at home, that I sitting here, will sell out our 15 quid pretty much every time Kell Brook fights. We're looking here, Kell Brook is defending a version of the welterweight world title against a guy who, you know, Diego Chaves is a difficult fighter, but he's not a top 10 welterweight, let's be honest. You know, Kell Brook is defending a version of his world title against a guy who is not a top 10 welterweight, a guy who's lost to Keith Thurman, a guy who's lost to Brandon Rios. You know, all of this stuff that Eddie Hearn's going around saying that Chaves is a more difficult fight than Sean Porter, it's the toughest fight of Kell Brook's career, is utter nonsense. You know, Sean Porter had a very good chance of beating Kell Brook. You know, it was actually a close fight that I think could have gone either way. Sean Porter is a real decent level fighter. He's beaten Adrian Broner. He's beaten Paulie Malignaggi. He's beaten Devon Alexander. He carries power. He's athletic. When he went into that fight, most people would have him as a top 5 welterweight. Diego Chaves has not beaten any of those opponents. To my eye, he's not got the same skill set as Sean Porter. He's certainly not got the same record of wins as Sean Porter against named opponents. This is a lesser title defence, you know. This is Kell Brook defending his world title against someone outside of the top 10. For me, this fight is no more different to Deontay Wilder defending against Tony Thompson. It's that sort of level of fight, you know. Respectable opponent, not terrible, certainly not the best that's out there. You know, taken his knocks, had a few losses, not the best available matchup. Now, Chris Eubank Jr., he's an enigma. He's a very entertaining guy. He's a very interesting fighter. There's a lot of circus around all of his fights, and he creates interest and intrigue. But we're sitting here now in the last week of September, and this bill is, what, 3 weeks away? 4 weeks away? It's unlikely that Eubank Jr. is going to be in a top-level fight. I mean, don't get me wrong, if Eubank Jr. turns up and fights for a world title on this bill against Andy Lee or something of that nature, then yeah, fair enough, make it pay-per-view. But on the basis that Eubank Jr. is going to fight somebody ranked outside the top 10 in a sort of middleweight comeback matchup, that doesn't help. You know, Chris Eubank Jr., he's an entertaining guy. But who are the top 3 best guys Chris Eubank Jr. has beaten in his career? Seriously, think about it. Name the top 3 best guys Chris Eubank Jr. has beaten in his career. Dmitry Chudinov, and that's when it gets very difficult, isn't it? Very difficult. Bradley Price? Tyan Booth? You know, Chris Eubank Jr. is a guy who is best known for losing to Billy Joe Saunders. And whilst he may have a bright future ahead of him, he's not a pay-per-view star yet. Neither is Gavin McDonnell. You know, Ricky Burns, this guy at the autumn of his career who's taken a few losses recently and hasn't looked overly impressive in his wins, may I add. This is a very weak pay-per-view card. Very, very weak. And if we allow bills like this to become pay-per-view, then we're going to have a pay-per-view every 6 weeks, every 8 weeks. The good news is, as boxing fans, that the power is very much in our hands. We actually have the ability here to somewhat humiliate the pay-per-view model. We have the ability here to send a direct message to Sky, send a direct message to Eddie Hearn. I pretty much guarantee that if we don't buy this pay-per-view, it's very much unlikely that we're going to see this level of bill again as a pay-per-view model. This is our chance to send a message. If you take your 15 quid and chuck it towards this bill, it's going to happen again and again and again. Let me say, finally, before I finish, I know I've had a bit of a rant here, but before I finish, this is also hugely detrimental to Kell Brook's career. You know, Kell Brook this year has fought Jojo Dam, Frankie Gavin, Diego Chaves, and he's being turned into a pay-per-view fighter under this model, fighting those lesser opponents. You know, if you pay pay-per-view and make this a successful, profitable event, Kell Brook, Chris Van Heerden pay-per-view, Kell Brook, Devon Alexander pay-per-view, Kell Brook, Luis Colacho pay-per-view, Kell Brook, Leonard Bundu pay-per-view. You're sponsoring all those events in 2016. You really are. This is the time. I'm not hating for the sake of hating. I'm not being annoyed for the sake of being annoyed. But this is the time where I feel we must stand up and come out against this bill. And the only way to do it is not to send Eddie Hearn an abusive message on Twitter. We've got to vote with our feet. We've got to not buy this pay-per-view. If you're going to sit at home and spend your 15 quid on this pay-per-view, you are part responsible for the pay-per-views we're going to get in 2016. You are part responsible for the fact that Kell Brook is not fighting the top of the welterweight division. The only way to make Eddie Hearn put the big fights only on pay-per-view, and for Eddie Hearn to put Kell Brook in the big fights, is if we show him clearly that it is not financially viable to have Kell Brook, Diego Chaves on pay-per-view. With Tyson Fury, Klitschko out, the build-up for this pay-per-view has also been pretty horrific. I mean, I haven't even seen much lead up to Kell Brook, Diego Chaves to get me excited for this fight. We can't just... It's wrong. It's wrong on every level. And we've got to make this the lowest performing pay-per-view in Sky Sports history. Leave your comments below. Let me know your thoughts. Keen to discuss. Many thanks for watching. If you agree with this video, please share it. Please like it. Please spread the word. I really think that now is the time to get the message out there not to be buying this pay-per-view. As I say, if Eddie Hearn adds Carl Frotz, if the fight doesn't go ahead on pay-per-view, I'll rethink and withdraw. But on the basis that we're going to have Kell Brook and Eubank Jr. headlining a pay-per-view, enough is enough against this level of opposition. Thanks for watching.